My name is Alex and I'm 25. Every day I followed the same routine: morning workouts, coffee at my favorite cafe, and then heading to work. It was my way of maintaining balance in life. But that day, when I saw Laura, my 45-year-old mother-in-law, everything changed. I was already heading toward the door when I noticed her sitting in a far corner of the cafe. She was alone, lost in thought, holding a cup of coffee. I froze for a moment, caught off guard, because at that moment she looked completely different than usual. Perhaps it was the loose dress or the relaxed expression on her face, but something about her drew me in like a magnet. I decided to approach her, jokingly saying, "I never thought I'd see you here at this time." She looked up and smiled, and that smile was special, as if she was genuinely happy to see me. We started talking, and to my surprise, the conversation flowed easily, as if we had known each other for a long time. I had always seen Laura as just my wife's mother, but at that moment I realized there was so much more behind those eyes. "Do you come here often?" she asked, trying to hide her surprise. I nodded. "Almost every day. This is my favorite spot for morning coffee." She laughed, telling me stories about her youth, how she loved spending time in places like this when she was in college. I listened, fascinated by how interesting it was to hear her talk about her life. Her voice had a wisdom that had always drawn me in, but now there was also a warm, almost intimate tone. Time flew by, and I began to realize that with each word she spoke, I was sinking deeper. The clock struck 11, and Laura glanced at her phone, noticing she was late for a meeting. "I have to go," she said, getting up. "But thank you for the morning company, Alex. You brightened my day." I watched her walk to the door, feeling my heart beat faster for some reason. After she left, I sat at my table for a few more minutes, reflecting on what had just happened. I had never felt anything like this toward her, or toward anyone else, to be honest. Maybe I was too young to understand all the complexities of life, but that couldn't explain what was happening to me now. The rest of the day, I couldn't get the image of Laura out of my head. Every gesture, her voice, even her scent, it all seemed magical. I tried to convince myself that it was just a chance encounter, that maybe I was just overtired, but the thought wouldn't leave me. Even when I got home and hugged my wife, I was mentally still at that morning cafe, replaying Laura's smile over and over again. Later that night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized one thing: that meeting had changed something, and whether I wanted it or not, something new had formed between Laura and me, something that defied logic and explanation. It was just a random encounter, but it had become the start of something bigger, something I wasn't ready for. A few days passed since that morning meeting at the cafe, but thoughts of Laura wouldn't leave my mind. I tried to focus on work, spend more time with my wife, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, heard her laugh. It was ridiculous. She was my mother-in-law, almost 2 decades older than me, and I was just a guy who, it seemed, should be focused on family life. But everything changed that night when I saw her again. Laura hosted a dinner at her place, inviting the whole family. The atmosphere was relaxed, and the conversations slowly turned into jokes, and jokes into memories of the past. I tried to be polite, to keep my distance, but every time Laura looked at me, I felt that magnetic pull toward her. There was something new in her eyes, something that seemed to invite me to break all boundaries. When dinner ended, everyone began to gather their things. Laura asked me to help her with the dishes, and I gladly agreed, hoping we might get a chance to talk alone. The others scattered around the house, and we were left alone in the quiet, sorting out the plates. I didn't know what to say, but Laura, as always, found a way to start the conversation. "You seem thoughtful today," she said, turning to me. Her voice was soft, but there was a note of curiosity in it that stirred something inside me. "Just a lot on my mind," I replied, avoiding her gaze. I couldn't afford to be vulnerable around her, knowing how easily she could read me. "Do you want to talk about it?" Laura stepped closer, and I could smell her. Lavender mixed with something warmer, more intimate. At that moment, the tension between us hung thick in the air. I looked at her, and the words slipped out before I could think them through. "Laura, you know something's happening. You feel it too, don't you?" She didn't answer right away, but her gaze grew more intense. She took a step toward me, and without thinking, I reached out, placing my hand on her waist. "This is wrong," she whispered, but her voice trembled, betraying her uncertainty. "But you're still here," I replied quietly, feeling the world narrow down to this moment. In the next instant, before either of us could think or say anything more, we were closer than ever. I leaned in slowly, giving her the chance to pull away, but she didn't move. Our lips met, and everything I knew, everything I thought was right or wrong, disappeared. The kiss was gentle, but it carried all the passion that had been building between us all this time. She responded, and it was like a breath of fresh air, as if I had finally found something I had been searching for. We pulled away, breathing heavily, and I looked at Laura, trying to understand what had just happened. In her eyes, I saw the same confusion that I felt. That was a mistake," she whispered, but there wasn't a hint of regret in her voice. "Maybe," I agreed, "but if it was, why does it feel so right?" Laura didn't answer. She simply took my hand, squeezing it tightly as if afraid I would disappear, and that touch said more than any words could. We knew that kiss had changed everything, but neither of us was ready to let it go so easily. After Laura and I kissed, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. I came home late that night, feeling like a traitor to my wife, but at the same time realizing that something inside me had changed forever. Encounters with Laura no longer just excited me. They became my obsession. We tried to avoid each other in the following days. Laura became more reserved, her smile no longer as bright, and her voice more distant. It seemed like she was trying to build a wall between us, but every time our eyes met, I saw the same struggle in her that I felt in myself. One evening, my wife invited her parents over for dinner. The situation was tense. Everyone tried to pretend that nothing had happened, that everything was the same as before. I did my best to play the role of the perfect husband, giving no reason for suspicion. But each time Laura laughed at a joke my father-in-law told or accidentally brushed my hand while passing something at the table, a spark flared up inside me. When the dinner ended, we were left alone in the kitchen, as if it had become our inevitable tradition. While washing the dishes, I felt her gaze settle on me. "Why are you looking at me like that?" The words escaped me before I could think of the consequences. "It's you who's looking at me like that," she replied quietly, drying her hands with a towel, and I realized she had been waiting for me to make the first move again. I slowly moved closer, feeling the excitement rise inside me. "I tried to forget what happened," I admitted, trying to find the strength to stop before making the same mistake again. "How's that going for you?" she asked, squinting slightly. Her lips were so close I could feel their warmth. "Not well," I whispered, and she stepped toward me, her fingers lightly grazing my cheek. That touch made me forget everything, and I was once again pulled into her gravity. We stood like that, close but not touching, until suddenly something clicked inside both of us. I pulled her closer, and our lips met again, but this time the kiss was more desperate, more demanding. It wasn't just an act of passion, it was a challenge to everything that was right and wrong. Laura pulled away first, her breathing heavy, and her eyes glistened with unsaid words. "We can't keep doing this," she breathed, stepping back, but I could see the desire in her gaze contradicting her words. "I know," I said, feeling my heart clench at the understanding that there was no turning back for us now. "But I can't stop." "You must," she said firmly, but then unexpectedly smiled, as if realizing for the first time that she had already lost control of the situation. "Because I can't." In that moment, as her eyes met mine and the world around us ceased to exist, I knew we had already crossed the line. We had already plunged into this darkness, and there was no way back. I tried to avoid Laura after our last kiss. Everything inside me screamed that I needed to stop, return to reality, to my family, but my heart no longer seemed to belong to me. Laura and I began communicating cautiously, as if any extra gesture could ruin everything. One morning, when I arrived at the office earlier than usual, Laura was already there. She sat at her desk, intently staring at her laptop screen, her slim fingers typing methodically on the keys. I did my best to focus on work, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Finally, she lifted her head and met my gaze. There was something unsettling in the way she looked at me, as if trying to understand what I would do next. "We need to talk," I said before I had time to think about what I actually wanted to say. She nodded and gestured for me to follow her into the meeting room. Behind the closed door, we sat in silence for several long seconds. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "You understand we can't keep this up, right?" "I understand," I replied, though the words came out with difficulty. "But I can't just forget what happened between us." She sighed and looked away, as if searching for answers in the empty space. "This will never be easy, Nick," she said, using my name sincerely for the first time, without any hidden meaning, and it hit me right in the heart. "I don't want to ruin your life." "You won't ruin it," I assured her, though I didn't even believe the words I was saying. "Maybe it was a mistake, but it was our mistake. I'm willing to take responsibility for it." Laura seemed to contemplate my words, then suddenly reached out, her hand softly touching my cheek. "You have to understand one thing, Nick." Her voice was barely audible, but there was a note of resolve in it. "What we feel, it's just a moment. You can't let it destroy your future." Her words held a truth I had been running from, but despite that, her touch, her closeness were too real to ignore. I pulled her to me gently, as if afraid she would disappear. Our lips met again, but this time the kiss was different. There was no desperation in it like before. It was a kiss between two people who understood they were on the edge but didn't want to turn back. We pulled away, breathing heavily, and Laura turned away, covering her face with her hands. I can't," she whispered. "You have to leave, Nick. Leave now before we do something we can't take back." I saw her shoulders tremble, how she tried to pull herself together. And at that moment, I realized I had a choice. "You're right," I forced myself to say. "I have to leave. But know that it's not because I don't want to be with you. It's because I want it too much." Those words felt like a sentence. I left her standing in the room alone, feeling like I was being torn apart from the inside. With every step down the hallway, I felt the weight of guilt and desire pressing against the office walls. But just as I was about to walk out the door, I turned back and saw her reflection in the glass. Laura stood there, motionless, watching me leave, her face focused, but in her eyes, I saw the same torment I felt. That's when I understood. We could walk away. We could break this connection. But it wasn't just random passion binding us. It was something deeper, something that wouldn't let us forget each other no matter how hard we tried. Time passed, and each minute at the office became a real test for me. I tried to distract myself with work, burying myself in reports and tasks, but thoughts of Laura wouldn't leave me. Every time I heard her voice or saw her smile, the fire inside me grew stronger, impossible to ignore. I knew that this situation couldn't continue forever. My feelings for her were only getting stronger, and soon this could lead to the destruction of everything I knew. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to go outside to get some fresh air. Autumn had wrapped the city in its bright colors, and I strolled through the park, enjoying the crisp air and the quiet. Suddenly, I saw her. Laura was sitting on a bench, looking up at the sky where the stars were beginning to appear. That was the moment when everything inside me wavered. I approached her, and as soon as I did, she turned her head and met my gaze. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, smiling slightly. There was no longer any anxiety in her voice, only a touch of sadness. I sat down next to her, a vast space between us that we could no longer ignore. "I needed to think," I replied, trying to find the words to express everything I was feeling. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine." She sighed, and I saw the same understanding in her eyes. "Me neither," she said, and in that moment I saw the same struggle in her that I had faced. We were both lost in our thoughts, and the silence between us seemed endless. "We could try to start over," I said, thinking it might be a way out. "No pressure, no expectations, just two people who want to get to know each other." Laura looked at me in surprise, and I saw her face light up with hope. "Do you really mean that?" "I don't want things to go wrong again." "I'm serious," I confirmed, and my resolve strengthened. "If we can be honest with each other, maybe we can find a way." She nodded, and in that moment the world around us seemed to freeze. I reached for her, and our hands met. It was a simple touch, but it was full of promises and hope. Then, as I leaned in slightly, our lips met in a gentle kiss, full of understanding and patience. This kiss wasn't passionate, but it was real. It spoke of how we were ready to give each other a chance. When we pulled away, Laura looked into my eyes, and I saw a new determination in her. "I'm ready, Nick. Let's start fresh." From that moment, something changed between us. We began spending time together, opening up our worlds to each other, sharing fears and dreams. It wasn't just infatuation anymore. It became a true partnership where we valued one another. We laughed, shared secrets, planned the future, and understood that despite all the obstacles in our path, we could be happy. Over time, I realized that each new day with Laura was a chance to rediscover a world full of unexpected turns. Yes, our story began with mistakes, but it also opened the door to something incredible. Every kiss, every touch, every moment together became a brick in the foundation of our new relationship. I knew we had a long road ahead, but now we were ready to walk it together.